just as a big picture thing, how do you think people should view this budget?
Well, first, thanks for having me. Of course, I've worked with the Concord Coalition for more than 20 years, and all of you are terrific, and we've worked together a long time. Always glad to be here. I mean, the president's budget's really not something that should be taken literally, of course, because it's going to be DOA in Congress, just like last year's budget was DOA in Congress. But it is helpful for laying out the president's vision, a good deal of the policies he's going to push Democrats to support, and the policies he could veto. So it is a helpful vision. Ultimately, I think my problem with the president's budget is it's a classic tax and spend budget in an era when serious deficit reduction is required. As we know, budget deficits under a current policy baseline are headed as high as $3.5 trillion over the next decade, and even that's with interest rates not rising much. And in this budget, there is about $5 trillion in new taxes, but instead of pairing it with $5 trillion in spending cuts as an all-out assault on the deficit, most of the new spending just goes to most of the new taxes just go towards new spending. And that is not only not helpful with the deficit, I would argue that it actually makes deficit reduction harder. Because if there is $5 trillion in plausible taxes out there, you need to use it for deficit reduction, because otherwise, when we finally do get to deficit reduction, all the best tax-raising policies, all the tax-the-rich policies are now off the table. They're gone. So now when you finally get to reducing the deficit, which we have to do at some point, now you have to tax the middle class. Now you have to do the harder stuff because you've already used up the easy stuff. So I think ultimately, even before you get to the gimmicks that make some of the numbers fake, the overall approach of marrying higher taxes with higher spending is a step backwards for the deficit, not a step forward.
In that regard, I was playing with the CBO's new interactive tool, where you can type in savings and then, see where you come out in terms of deficit reduction and the debt to GDP ratio. And, I think it would take about $6 trillion worth of policy savings, plus another $1 trillion in interest to stabilize the debt at today's ratio of GDP. And, you mentioned that the budget has about $5 trillion in taxes. So let's say you took all of those and did nothing on the spending side. You still couldn't stabilize the debt to GDP ratio, at where it is now. So it's kind of a measure of how deep the problem is. And this budget, the president's budget, with all the spending increases and tax increases that you've talked about, it kind of stabilizes the debt. I don't know what after 10 years, but it's kind of like at 106% of GDP, a little bit higher than it is now, and just below the all-time record. There's 3 years, I think, where it's like 106% of GDP, and the record is 106.1, and it never gets there.
Of course, that's by the White House accounting.
Yes.
Again, once you adjust for the gimmicks, once you allow CBO to take a stab at the numbers, I think the numbers are going to be much higher for the deficit. But certainly, I think the White House may have made a conscious decision that we can't have the opponents call this the highest debt in American history. So we need to keep it just a hair under the peak of World War II, where it peaked at about, I think, 106.4, 106.2.
106.1 was the record. And so it doesn't take much to get over there.
No, we're a hurricane supplemental away.